Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling one of those historical events that sounds like a prank, but it was tragically real. The Boston Molasses Flood of 1919. We're using excerpts from the American History Tellers podcast episode, A Deadly Deluge, as our guide. So you might be wondering how on earth 2.3 million gallons of molasses could cause a disaster, right? Well, let's dive into the details and find out.
What's so fascinating about this event is that it reveals just how dangerous a seemingly harmless substance can become. When basic safety measures are ignored, it really highlights the potential for even the mundane to turn deadly.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's January 15th, 1919, a frigid winter day in Boston's North End. Imagine a bustling neighborhood, packed with people, predominantly working-class Italian immigrants, and looming over it all is this 50-foot-tall steel tank holding that unimaginable quantity of molasses, owned by the United States Industrial Alcohol Company, or USIA.
This tank, as you'll soon discover, had a troubled history. Right from the start, its construction was rushed, overseen by a USIA executive named Arthur P. Gell, who, shockingly, had absolutely no engineering experience.
Wait, no engineering background for a project this massive? You've got to be kidding. What were they thinking?
It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? Gell was under immense pressure from USIA to complete the project as quickly and cheaply as possible. This, unfortunately, led to a series of shortcuts and ignored safety protocols. That set the stage for disaster.
So what kind of shortcuts are we talking about?
Well, for starters, there was actually a worker fatality during construction. But instead of halting work to investigate and improve safety measures, they resumed construction after only a half-day delay.
Can you believe that? That's horrifying. Surely there must have been some sort of inspection or testing to ensure the tank's safety.
You would think so, wouldn't you? But instead of conducting a full water test to check for leaks and structural integrity, they only filled the tank with 6 inches of water. It's a shocking disregard for basic safety standards.
Wow, so many red flags already. And I'm guessing these weren't the only warning signs.
Not at all. Workers consistently reported leaks, strange rumbling noises coming from the tank, and serious concerns about its structural integrity. In fact, one worker, Isaac Gonzalez, directly warned Gell about the dangers.
So someone did try to speak up. What happened? Did Jill listen?
Unfortunately not. You see, Gonzalez was from Puerto Rico and had first-hand experience with molasses. He understood that fermentation could produce gases and increase pressure within the tank, especially in warmer temperatures. He was so concerned that he even started secretly releasing small amounts of molasses into the harbor to relieve pressure.
He was risking his job to try and prevent a disaster. That's incredible.
Exactly. Sadly, his warnings went unheeded. It seems the company was more concerned with deadlines and profits than the safety of their workers and the surrounding community.
It's a classic case of corporate negligence, isn't it? They ignored all the signs, prioritizing speed and cost over safety. And tragically, it cost lives.
Precisely. And on January 12, 1919, a fresh shipment of molasses arrived, filling the already stressed tank to its absolute limit. This was essentially the tipping point. Just 3 days later, on January 15th, the inevitable happened. The tank, unable to withstand the pressure any longer, catastrophically failed.
So set the scene for us. What happened when the tank finally burst?
Imagine the deafening roar of steel ripping apart as the tank buckles under immense pressure. A 25-foot-tall wave of molasses, weighing millions of pounds, surged outward at 35 miles per hour, engulfing everything in its path.
That's a terrifying image. The American History Tellers podcast does a remarkable job of capturing the chaos and terror of that moment through personal accounts of survivors.
Absolutely. One particularly harrowing story comes from Maria Ionesca, who watched in horror as her young son was swept away by the relentless wave of molasses. It's a heartbreaking testament to the sudden and devastating nature of this disaster.
And remember, this was a densely populated neighborhood. There must have been countless people in the direct path of that wave. Were there any other stories of survival?
Another incredible account comes from Royal Albert Lehman, a brakeman on the elevated railway. As the wave hit, he felt the train shudder and instantly knew something was terribly wrong. He pulled the emergency cord, bringing the train to a halt, just moments before the tracks ahead collapsed under the force of the molasses. His quick thinking likely saved the lives of everyone on board.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time. That's some serious heroism. In the face of unimaginable chaos, did anyone else manage to escape the deluge?
One survivor, Martin Clary, had his house completely crushed by the wave while he was sleeping inside. He incredibly managed to escape by riding a piece of his bed frame like a raft through the wreckage.
Riding a bed frame through a flood of molasses, that's straight out of a movie.
It's a testament to the sheer force of the wave and the unpredictable nature of the disaster. Imagine this scene. Buildings reduced to rubble, streets coated in a thick, sticky mess, and the air filled with the deafening roar of the collapsing tank and the screams of people caught in the surge.
It's hard to even fathom the level of chaos and destruction. What about the emergency responders? How did they even begin to deal with a disaster of this magnitude?
The firehouse,
Yeah.
situated a mere 50 feet from the tank, was instantly inundated with molasses. Firefighter William Connor described the wave hitting like a cyclone, quickly filling their space and leaving them struggling for air. Rescue efforts were severely hampered by the thick, sticky molasses, making it incredibly difficult to reach those trapped beneath the debris.
It's hard to imagine a more challenging environment for a rescue operation. So what was the aftermath of this catastrophe?
The aftermath was grim. 21 people lost their lives, 150 were injured, and the entire neighborhood was essentially buried in molasses. It took weeks to clean up the sticky mess, and the smell lingered for months.
It's a tragic reminder that even something as seemingly innocuous as molasses can become a deadly force when negligence and disregard for safety come into play. So what happened next? Did anyone take responsibility for this disaster?
Well, in the wake of such a horrific event, you might expect immediate accountability, right? But that's not quite how things unfolded. Initially, USIA actually tried to deflect blame, even going so far as to suggest that anarchists had bombed the tank.
Seriously, they tried to blame anarchists. That's a pretty outrageous claim.
It is, isn't it? It seems like a desperate attempt to shift focus away from their own failings. But thankfully, the truth, as they say, has a way of coming out.
So how did the truth come to light? Was there an official investigation?
Absolutely. Multiple investigations and legal battles ensued. Judge Wilford Bolster, who conducted a preliminary investigation, didn't mince words. He placed the blame squarely on USIA, highlighting the tank's faulty construction and the company's blatant disregard for safety protocols.
So the judge called them out on their negligence?
He did. However, a grand jury, surprisingly, failed to indict USIA. This could have been the end of it, but the victims and their families weren't about to let USIA off the hook. They filed a class action lawsuit, the largest in Massachusetts history at that time.
It's inspiring to see them fighting back, demanding justice for those who were lost and injured. It couldn't have been easy going up against a powerful corporation like USIA.
You're absolutely right. It was a David versus Goliath situation. But they had a secret weapon, a brilliant attorney named Damon Hall. He was determined to expose USIA's wrongdoing and hold them accountable for their actions.
So how did Hall go about building his case against USIA?
Hall meticulously gathered evidence, painstakingly piecing together the story of the tank's construction, the ignored warnings, and the company's attempts to cover up their negligence. He even managed to secure a deposition from Arthur Gell himself.
Yeah, hold on. Gell agreed to testify. What did he have to say for himself?
Well, his testimony was incredibly revealing and ultimately incredibly damning for USIA. Under oath, Gell admitted that he had absolutely no qualifications to oversee such a complex engineering project. He confessed that the pressure from USIA was so intense that they were willing to cut corners, even if it meant risking lives to meet their deadlines and save money.
Wow. That's a shocking admission. He basically confessed to the company's reckless disregard for safety. What happened next?
This confession, coupled with the findings of the auditor, Hugh Ogden, who oversaw the hearings, sealed USIA's fate. Ogden, after 2 years of meticulous investigation, concluded that the collapse was a direct result of poor and rushed construction, not sabotage, as USIA had initially claimed.
So the truth finally came out thanks to the persistence of the victims, their families, and Damon Hall. But what about the victims? Did they receive any compensation for their losses?
Yes, they did. Initially, the court awarded a rather meager sum, especially considering the scale of the tragedy and the suffering it caused. But Damon Hall wasn't satisfied. He pushed for a jury trial, hoping to secure a more substantial settlement. This pressure tactic worked. USIA, realizing they were likely to lose in court, negotiated a final settlement of $628,000.
While it's still a far cry from true justice, it was a significant victory for the victims and their families. This case must have set a precedent for corporate accountability and safety regulations, right?
Absolutely. The Boston molasses flood, despite its bizarre nature, had a profound impact on building codes in Boston and across the nation. It highlighted the critical need for stringent safety regulations, especially in industries dealing with potentially hazardous materials. It forced people to think about the consequences of cutting corners and the importance of prioritizing human life over profit.
It's a stark reminder that even in the pursuit of progress and innovation, we can't afford to compromise on safety. There's a fascinating detail that stuck with me from the podcast. For years after the flood, residents of the North End reported catching whiffs of molasses, especially on warm days.
Ah, yes. The phantom smell of molasses. It's a poignant reminder, isn't it? Even years after the physical evidence was cleaned up, the memory of the tragedy lingered. This sensory ghost speaks to how deeply this event impacted the community, leaving an invisible scar that transcended the physical damage.
It's also a reminder that history isn't just a collection of dates and facts in a textbook. It's about real people, real lives affected by the choices we make. It's a reminder to learn from past mistakes and to never forget the human cost of negligence.
It's truly remarkable how this seemingly bizarre event, a flood of molasses no less, has had such a lasting impact on safety regulations and engineering practices. It serves as a stark warning that even the smallest oversights, cost-cutting measures, or disregarded warnings can have catastrophic consequences.
It's a lesson that we can all apply to our own lives, wouldn't you say? How often do we dismiss those seemingly insignificant details, those nagging doubts, those little cracks in the system, only to realize later that they were warning signs of something much bigger?
Precisely. We often focus on the dramatic events themselves, but it's those seemingly insignificant details that often hold the key to prevention. Think about it. If USIA had simply listened to Isaac Gonzalez, if they conducted a proper water test, if they had prioritized safety over speed and cost cutting, this entire tragedy could have been avoided.
It's a sobering thought. It makes you wonder what seemingly insignificant events or trends are happening in our world today that might have the potential to create a similarly massive impact down the road. Are we paying attention to the right signals? Are we learning from the mistakes of the past?
Those are crucial questions, and ones that we all need to be asking ourselves. It's a call to action for us to be more vigilant, more critical in our thinking, and more willing to challenge the status quo. We need to develop a keen sense of what I call historical pattern recognition, the ability to spot potentially dangerous trends by drawing parallels to past events.
That's a fantastic term, historical pattern recognition, something we should all strive for. Because while we can't predict the future, we can certainly learn from the past. And who knows, maybe by paying attention to the right signals, we can prevent the next molasses flood, whatever form it may take.
It's a fascinating challenge, isn't it? To be both students of history and astute observers of our present, constantly seeking those connections, those patterns that might offer a glimpse into what lies ahead.
Absolutely. It's like we're detectives, piecing together clues from the past to solve the mysteries of the present, and perhaps even prevent future disasters. But speaking of the past, it's interesting how some historical events, despite their magnitude and strangeness, seem to fade from public memory.
That's a great point. The Boston molasses flood, as tragic and impactful as it was, isn't exactly a household name. It makes you wonder what determines which historical events stick with us and which ones get relegated to the footnotes.
I know, right? Maybe it has something to do with how we as a society process and make sense of traumatic events. Do we choose to remember as a way of learning and preventing future tragedies? Or do we sometimes collectively bury certain memories as a coping mechanism?
It's a complex interplay of factors for sure. And it makes me wonder if there are other events, hidden in the annals of history, just waiting to be rediscovered and analyzed for the lessons they hold.
That's an intriguing thought. Imagine all the hidden stories, the forgotten disasters. That could offer valuable insights into human behavior, societal structures, and the unintended consequences of our actions.
Exactly. And that's precisely why deep dives like this one are so important. They allow us to unearth these forgotten narratives, examine them through a modern lens, and extract valuable lessons that might otherwise be lost to time.
So in a way, we're not just exploring the past, we're using it as a tool to understand our present and perhaps even shape our future. By learning from the mistakes of those who came before us, we can hopefully avoid repeating them.
Precisely. And in the case of the Boston molasses flood, it reminds us that progress and innovation must always be tempered with a healthy dose of caution and a commitment to safety. Cutting corners and prioritizing profit over people can have devastating consequences, as we've clearly seen.
Absolutely. And it also highlights the importance of individual voices, like that of Isaac Gonzalez, who tried to raise the alarm despite the risks. It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to speak up when we see something wrong, even if it means challenging those in positions of authority.
His story is a powerful testament to the courage it takes to be a whistleblower. It's a reminder that ethical behavior and a commitment to truth should always trump blind obedience or fear of reprisal.
And sometimes Those individual voices can spark a larger movement for change. In this case, the victims and their families, though from a marginalized community, banded together to demand justice and accountability. Their collective action ultimately led to significant improvements in safety standards and regulations.
It's a powerful example of how ordinary people can affect extraordinary change when they refuse to be silenced or ignored. It's a reminder that even in the face of tragedy and injustice, hope and resilience can prevail.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into a truly bizarre and tragic event. I think we've uncovered some important lessons about corporate responsibility, the importance of listening to warning signs, and the power of collective action.
I agree. It's been a fascinating exploration of how a seemingly insignificant substance like molasses could become the source of such a devastating event. And more importantly, it's reminded us that history is full of valuable lessons that we can apply to our own lives and our world today.
And for those of you who want to delve even deeper into this captivating story, we highly recommend the book Dark Tide, The Great Boston Molasses Flood of 1919 by Stephen Puleo. It's a meticulously researched and engaging account that brings this event and its aftermath to life.
It's a must-read for anyone interested in history engineering, or simply understanding the human factors that can lead to both triumph and tragedy.
Well said. So until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the fascinating world around us.